Jeremy Little, who's going to give us some of his perspectives of why he thinks IRPIC is an important activity for researchers and land managers interested in terrestrial ecosystems.
Thanks, Eric. And I want to acknowledge right up front that many of you have been involved with IRPIC for longer and more than I have, and so this is something of a newcomer's perspective. But I think that some of what I'll probably say will seem like you've heard it before, but I want to reiterate that as we transition into the next plan, there are a couple of things I think worth keeping in mind. And in short, it's with fewer resources and more people trying to do work here, and also maybe now more than ever, the work we do needs to be more relevant. It's not going to happen if we don't work effectively together. And Martin introduced some thoughts on why that would be the case across the federal and non-federal elements of our capacity in Alaska and the Arctic. And I think together we can do a lot more and be a lot more relevant than we will if we're out wheels on our own. So am I actually able to drive these slides, or should I just?
No, or if you want to, I can hand over the presenter mode to you, or I can do it and you can just tell me to move along.
Okay, let's just go to the next slide then. That'll work, and we don't have to transfer it back later.
Great.
So we put together some slides. These are from Steve and a little bit with my input on why the Terrestrial Ecosystems Collaboration Team matters for Arctic researchers, but also from our own perspective at the Climate Science Center, and I think an emerging perspective in federal agency work and across the board is also why it matters for stakeholders and decision makers. And I think we all come from a scientific world where we've always wanted to make more of an impact in the real world, that decision relevant world, and where also the struggle to be is not just doing science on things or to things that are of most interest at the moment, not necessarily just curiosity driven. And I think IRPIC provides us a real opportunity to move forward in that realm, in particular because of what we are interested in and working on collectively, but also where we're poised to make a bigger impact than we otherwise might just doing research alone. Okay, next slide, please. It's not very often, not a very big gap between events of something novel or interesting or unprecedented happening in the Arctic. And these events capture a lot of attention in the media, but it's worth noting that a lot of them are things that were either anticipated by scientific research or are consistent with projections for the future. These have become almost commonplace if you want to think of it that way, and as new normals and what was previously extreme or record-breaking. And that gets a lot of attention. But in reality, for a lot of the landscapes in which we work, next slide please, where we're living in the Arctic, working in the Arctic, the everyday reality looks a lot more like this potentially. Small changes on small parts of the landscape, but they add up over very large areas, tens of thousands to millions of hectares, depending on what process and what you're looking at. And we who work in the Arctic and those who live here or are faced with making decisions for it are dealing with a lot of different impacts that are additive or even multiplicative over very large portions of the landscape. So it's not just a newsy event. And these are the kinds of things that a lot of us are actually doing a lot of work on and integrating our efforts to better make our work relevant to those who manage or otherwise make decisions in these landscapes could go a long way towards simultaneously fulfilling the goals of IRPIC, but also making the work we do in the Arctic better adapted for the stakeholders that work here. Next slide, please. A number of the projects work on as a group are things that, when put together, have a lot of implications for the resources or ecosystem services that residents of Alaska and the Arctic and managers of those processes are tasked with adapting to on a daily basis. And so changes in the length of the fire season or where fires are burning, for example, novel fires in tundra or reburns in tundra that we are not familiar with in our historical experience, but are becoming seemingly more common, don't necessarily get as much attention in the headlines. Yet all these changes to the high latitude processes combine to set the stage for fundamental ecosystem change going forward. And those will have dramatic effects for those who depend on those resources, among other things, subsistence resources and community sustainability. And in the IRPIC session that we had at Alaska Forum on the Environment, we heard a lot about this need. This was last week. Heard a lot about the need to connect directly the research to those impacts. And that's where this community is uniquely poised in ways that not many others are. And so I think that that opportunity is something that we can capitalize on. Next slide. So back to why the Terrestrial Ecosystems Collaboration Team and IRPIC matter. The scale and the nature of the problems demand work from all of us. The interagency approach and also the work across not just the agencies, but also all of the universities and individual researchers from outside of Alaska who do work here. We can't tackle any of this alone just because it is so big and there are so many different pieces of the puzzle to put together. There's a real need, therefore, to leverage and pool the resources and expertise that we have. And with relatively flat or even declining budgets for some of this work and more people doing the work all the time, there's definitely the need to make what we have go further if we're going to make it more relevant and more synthetic than it already is. And urgently, there's a need to demonstrate effective use of resources and to avoid the appearance of duplication. And this has been increasingly true over the last couple of decades, but perhaps, and I've said this now 3 times, I think now more than ever, we can't be reinventing the wheel. We can't be adding small pieces to, or small refinements to things that are already fairly well documented. Instead, we have to be making those great leaps forward, and we have to be demonstrating that we are working together to avoid that duplication and to make sure that we're effectively using those resources. And increasingly, those need to be trained on problems that are relevant to those living and working in the Arctic. Next, please. Why should you participate as we go forward? We're committed to developing a terrestrial ecosystems collaboration team that does a number of things. And the first couple are things that we often think of when we work together as scientists. We want to connect researchers to funding opportunities. More money is always a positive thing to do more work or better work. And we want to connect researchers and funders to real-world stakeholder needs. So we'd like the things that we do to be more useful to those who depend on this place and who are tasked with managing aspects of it. We want to connect all members to broader Arctic efforts. Obviously, it's not just what's going on in some portions of the Arctic, but again, there's the potential for the circumpolar or circumarctic community to go further collectively than it could just by focusing on, say, Alaska or even, for example, the Yukon River Basin. We also want to promote collaboration and leveraging, and this is where IRPIC really comes into its own as a forum for making us go further than we otherwise might. And then we want to provide a foundation for synthesis above and beyond just checking the boxes. We don't want to just say, yeah, we met the milestones and here's the evidence that we did. We'd actually like it to become something it otherwise wouldn't have. And that's going to require all of our effort, but we on the collaboration team are committed to helping all of us achieve that. So with that, I guess the next slide, just thanks and some photo credits for those who shared photos with us to make our presentation more relevant to you. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Eric, and if there are any questions, or we can save them for later.
Why don't we save our discussion towards the end, because we do have a number of presentations to get through. So next, I think the next 2 talks are really going to be providing us with an overview of what 2 previous collaboration teams focused on fire team as well as the terrestrial ecosystems team, because in essence what was done over the past several years by these two collaboration teams provide the foundation for this team to move forward. So we're going to be hearing from the leads of those teams in some short presentations. So Randy and Eric, which one of you is going to do?
Well, I guess since I'm responsible for these slides, I guess I can take the lead if that's all right with you, Eric. Okay, Eric's in plural here in this group. We're going to have to call this the group of Eric. Well, I'm just going to briefly, with a couple slides here, talk about what we have done as the Wildfires Collaboration Team. But I would like to just say, before we even start that our team is ready and enthusiastic. I think I can speak for both Eric Miller and myself about the merger with TECT as a sub-team. We've been doing quite a bit of grounding work with our smaller group, and there's several participants on this call. People have actively helped with our work. But we feel that bringing the discussion up now to the cross-disciplinary group represented by TECT is going to be really helpful in advancing the understandings of disturbance and its role in Arctic change and human impacts. The human impacts is something we've begun to focus on more recently in the latter part of our group's activities. And I'd like you to remember that that includes not only impacts on the general public, but also on fire management and land management, which of course directly impacts the public. And the agency leads of those type of organizations in Alaska have been well represented on our team. Actually, Eric Miller, myself, is on the Bureau of Land Management, Alaska Fire Service. So we take really seriously what Jeremy said in the last presentation about connecting funders to real-world stakeholder needs, and we think that we've had a pretty good lead on that latter part, what are the real-world stakeholder needs with our group, and it's one of our strengths. So here's what we did in 2016. I'm not sure how many of you on the phone can see the slides. Is there anyone that can't see the slides? Because if I might just sort of let you look at it and not really read them word for word. How many folks cannot see the slides? Okay, silence says that perhaps most of you can see the slides, so that's good. So I'm just going to sort of let you read through that, but we had regular presentations in our group for different aspects of how fire related to other activities, like how it fits into the integrated ecosystem model, how it fits into carbon cycle monitoring and air pollution and smoke impacts and modeling. And we talked quite a bit about impacts on communities. Actually, there were presentations done at the Alaska Forum recently that also focused on that. And we, in our earlier years, we focused on summarizing needs for high latitude fire management and also the research that has already been conducted on things such as tundra fire, successional trajectories, and looked at some research gaps. One of the things that we are finishing up in terms of our milestones right away is our group sort of brainstormed this idea to have a workshop on opportunities to apply remote sensing in wildfire management and science. And we received an award from NASA, and that workshop is scheduled April 4th through the 6th, upcoming in Fairbanks. And the Alaska Fire Science Consortium at UAF that I work for is kind of taking the secretariat role on organizing that workshop. Let's move on to the next slide. I just wanted to show you this poster that we presented last year at the ASSW AOS because it just kind of summarizes some of our thinking over our 4 years of our group's activities in terms of how climate is contributing to these extreme events in terms of wildfire disturbance, especially in the north, the ecological impacts that go along with it, and then some of the human impacts, economic impacts, and how that the policymakers, not only the residents and communities, but also the policymakers are affected. It sort of summarizes some of the thinking of our group. And this is available on the website, so you can look at it further at your leisure. Next slide, please. These are just sort of highlights of the milestones through our years of operation, and we did the reviews and presentations that we did, a research gap analysis that we did where we came up with some needs, especially for more knowledge about fire-inducing weather patterns, further characterization of tundra fuel loading and moisture trends, plant successional pathways, and sort of a shortage of effective monitoring to detect long-term change in Arctic vegetation. There are some long-term studies out there. A lot of them don't know the importance of post-fire monitoring as the catalyst for threshold change. And that is one of the reasons we're excited to be now joined up with the TECT, because we think that one will be advanced in this go-round. Next slide, please. Now, if I still can have 5 minutes here, Eric, I wanted to just briefly show you what we think we might be able to accomplish this next go-round. So the next slide will be, I just summarized the milestones, the performance elements out of the new plan that relate to wildfire disturbance. And I just thought we could sort of look through those and see what is already in there that our group as a sub-team thinks that we could really help with. So the performance element 2.3.3, understand the impacts of Arctic and boreal forest wildfires on emissions, distributions, weather, and climate impacts of biomass burning plumes through improved use of emissions databases. Next slide. I'm going faster because I know we don't have a performance element 6.1.2, conduct field-based research that examines and quantifies relationships among surface topography, vegetation composition, hydrology, disturbance effects, including fire and thermokarst, and geophysical processes in permafrost soils to feed directly into models, decision support tools, and predictive analysis. We are very interested in the convergence of fire effects and the permafrost disturbance scenario that's in Alaska, even without fire disturbance right now, and the feedbacks between these two. 6.3.2 is carry out research to quantify and integrate across scales the effects of warming permafrost on ecosystem processing relating with disturbance regimes, including fire, thermokarst, and changes. Next slide. And finally, under the performance elements 7.1 and performance element 7.3, we bring this more to the human impacts with carrying out and synthesizing research on the monitoring of disturbance processes responsible for changes to key landscapes, including fire, warming permafrost, insects and pathogens, and human activities, evaluating how fire regimes will likely impact northern communities via impacts to infrastructure, health, and subsistence opportunities, and coordinating research on observations, geospatial data set generation, and model improvement needed to estimate emissions from wildland fires and the potential for those emissions to affect atmospheric carbon budgets and climate feedbacks. So I just wanted to highlight that there's quite a bit in the new plan that we feel that we'll be directly able to contribute with. And I think that's the last slide, Jessica.
All right, thank you, Randy and Eric, for that presentation and background. And I'm team members are already starting to think about how we connect the dots here between what the terrestrial ecology collaboration team is doing and how it relates to other collaboration teams. One, appreciate the work that Randy and Eric did in leading the previous collaboration team and their enthusiasm for moving forward here. I think the fire science community in Alaska is one of those areas where there's a certain degree or a very high degree of cohesion already. So hopefully this is an area that we'll be able to get some traction early on in the So with that, we next have Andrew Balzer on the line here, who's going to give an overview of the previous terrestrial ecosystems collaboration team activities. Andrew, take it away.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I'd like to thank Eric and Steve and Jeremy for the chance to go over the last round of under the old plan. So the first thing I think I'll do is I'll let you guys continue to control the slides. I don't need to do that. So if we can go to the next slide. There we go. So the TECT was originally undertaken under Carl Marcon and John Payne as the co-chairs. Quick shout out to them because they set us up really well with the groundwork for what Becky Anderson and I did when we took over in 2015. Carl and John both retired, and they left us with really good momentum to carry forward and then work on the next Arctic research plan and the next version of the terrestrial ecosystem collaboration. Next. So when I had the opportunity to go back and look at what had happened over the past 4 years, I realized very quickly there was a really strongly apparent trajectory that had come out of the work from 2013 to 17, and it really landed well with me. Essentially what happens here is that there was a shift from what enables the science, what are the sort of mechanical gaps in terms of data, in terms of connecting people, that limit the ability for federal agencies to collaborate. And then toward the end of that period, it transferred to, well, what is the science? What are the really big picture questions? And Jeremy's comments earlier in the meeting were really well appreciated because he pretty much set up the primary message I have. Jeremy mentioned that we're at a point where we need the big leaps forward rather than little. And this need to push the next kind of transformative steps is what I was really pleased to find had come out of this, looking back at the annual reports from 2013 to 17. And what it appears like is it wasn't a forced thing. It sort of happened organically by people taking on the milestones early on. And as those were progressively completed and more people were brought into TECT and the communication improved, it just naturally evolved into that sort of thing. And to me, this is a big deal. I remember things back in the maybe early 2000s, 99, 2002, that era, some of the early search meetings, some stuff about Arctic data, infrastructure, and that sort of thing. And there was this really big pie in the sky of being able to have much smoother collaborations that produce kind of high-level synthesis and better interdisciplinary science. And at the Arctic Open Observing Science meeting in November 2015, I remember having this epiphany. You may have had the same thing of seeing a lot of these talks and realizing that it had begun happening. It was the sort of collaboration that is now occurring. So that's basically the take-home message of my talk, is that looking through this 4 years of TECT, that's sort of what happened. That transition kind of occurred. So I'll just take you through some of the details of that if we can go to the next slide. So the terminology under the old plan was milestones. In the coming plan, the performance plan, there were milestones. just to give you a quick idea of what a milestone looks like, it's a specific thing, a specific activity or task which produces results enabling better interagency communication and collaboration. So here's one of the broad umbrella of coordinate and integrate terrestrial ecosystem research efforts. You have a specific milestone of a databases project working up metadata under specific standards with the ADI working group. So there were specific activities that the webinars facilitated and enabled, brought the right people together to attack the problem, and produce specific outputs, results, and tools that led to the completion of the milestone. So this is an example of the early part of the plan where there are really sort of mechanical specific gaps in data or metadata limiting collaborative science. So that's what a milestone looks like. The next several slides, real time on them. They're mainly to run through in a very general way what that list of milestones were under the old plan. The take-home message here is that of these milestones, except for 2 of them, which were for continued, they were all completed. They're all specific things that led to a higher level of communication among the collaboration team. And putting them in the slide deck, which is going to be available on the website, is basically a pointer. All these old annual reports and milestone reports for each year are available through the website, which Jessica Rohde maintains at a really high level, and she's also very helpful for getting people to the resources they need on the website. So this is mainly a pointer to let interested go back and get into the weeds with this if they'd like to. But if you look through, you'll notice that they're sort of very task-oriented and aimed at producing things like a circumboreal vegetation map, an actual data set that people need to collaborate, and making metadata more available. Next slide, please. The other major group of milestones was looking at key sites of active climate feedbacks, including permafrost, snow, I think that's supposed to be hydrology, not hydrates, and glaciers. And you can look through these briefly if you want. The details aren't that important except for, next slide. Oh, one of my slides is missing. Okay, that's okay. The last one is talking about permafrost. And the activities involved with completing that milestone basically made it apparent to everyone that there's justification for a new collaboration team, which is implemented under the permafrost collaboration team. And several of us, myself, Ben Jones, and Christina Shadler are the new co-chairs of that. And we very much encourage all of you to join and participate and as well. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier on that there was a transition from looking at missing pieces of data and metadata and things like that, which were preventing better collaboration. And once those milestones were completed, we're able to start thinking about the bigger picture and addressing some of the transformative next steps for Arctic science. The whole point of IRPIC, if you'll recall, is to take on the questions, the problems that no single agency can really handle by themselves, and to best line up resources and facilitate interaction and collaboration to address these things. When I took over in 2015, we had the opportunity to sort of rethink how we're going to do things and how we handle the webinars. And we decided that what we wanted to do is try and take some explicit steps to push it in that direction. So what we wound up doing is changing the webinar format to try and always include 2 speakers and either have contrasting viewpoints, perhaps complementary angles at a specific problem. We're trying to sort of push the science forward. And what I'd like to do is give you a couple examples of the webinars that we had and highlight those. So next slide, please. So let's see. Okay, this one was, this is Ted Shore. He's Northern Arizona University. He was the head of PCN. I'm having forgetting what the acronym stands for, the Permafrost Carbon Network. And that group has been an outgrowth of SEARCH. And the idea is to pull together interdisciplinary science results and produce big picture synthesis papers. And he gave an overview on that. So this was sort of a summary of what they've already done and also looking forward toward what the next steps are. And in this case, of course, it's all permafrost carbon and looking at local to global scales, what's happening and how do we sort of tie it all together. Next slide, please. So another one we had, this was one I was actually involved with. One sort of fundamental problem that faces a lot of Arctic science is reconciling results and processes at different scales. So we addressed this with this webinar. David Olefelt is looking at a circumarctic scale for permafrost degradation, thermokarst features. And basically what he's looking at are really broad regional trends of what types of permafrost degradation are occurring. In contrast, what I was doing is looking at a regional scale, tying these trends with specific ecosystem processes on the ground. And so we both reviewed our research, and presenting it together allowed us to sort of spin up a discussion about how to reconcile some of these scaling issues and do a better job of translating from a circumarctic scale down to processes on the ground that we can actually attack. Next slide, please. And then the final one I wanted to highlight, this was, it originally a TECT webinar. It wound up becoming an IRPIC-wide webinar. And this one was pairing a program manager with a specific researcher within a funded program that that manager oversees. So we had Lydia Vaughn, who is a researcher with the NG Arctic project. For those not familiar, NG Arctic is a really broad interdisciplinary research effort funded by the Department of Energy and overseen by Oak Ridge National Lab and several other national labs as well as UAF. And what she did is gave her research talk and then went from there to explain how it fits into the bigger picture of NG Arctic. And the synthesis involved with making that into a modeling product, something that can be extrapolated to the rest of the Arctic. After that, Dan Stover, who was the program manager with DOE, was good enough to give us an overview of, from where he sits, how this looks. When Congress allocates funding for research and the priorities are developed through the executive branch, it can be a fairly opaque thing for a lot of researchers, and the ability to think about how are you going to scope big science and how to handle that, what's happening in DC in terms of program managers interacting with each other and sort of nailing down what the priorities are was really enlightening for a lot of us and really helpful. So I enjoyed that one a lot, and that was the sort of thing we're trying to do. So that is an interest of time. I don't think I need to go say much more about it than that. All these things, all these presentations, all the milestones, all the annual reports are available on the website. In some cases here I've included links if people want to check things out. And with that, I think I will hand it back to Eric.
All right, thank you, Andrew and Randy and Eric, for your presentations. I think Andrew gave some important background, and both Andrew and Randy gave some important background to where we are now because of the fact that I think there was a recognition across IRPIC that permafrost was underrepresented in the IRPIC research or the Arctic Research Plan, and so there was a effort to have that as a separate goal, but also with the recognition that doing so was going to create some challenges for us in the fact that a lot of the processes controlling permafrost need to be considered in the context of an ecosystem-wide study rather than just focusing solely on the processes controlling permafrost itself. So that's a for what we're trying to do as part of the TECT, as well as Randy's observation of the importance of fire as an important ecosystem process. And so I think one of the things that we were challenged with in creating the new plan was we wanted to have a limited set of number of goals, but we still wanted to hit upon the important subjects that are important research activities within the IRPIC domain. So with that as background, I think I'm going to move into introducing you to the new IRPIC Terrestrial Ecosystems Collaboration Team. The first slide just gives a brief introduction of the three team leaders here that we've already introduced ourselves. It gives us some faces for you to look at here to see who we're at. But I'm sure a lot of you we already know quite well, so hope to get to know everyone else better as we move along here. Can you go to the next one then, please? So really the IRPIC Goal 7 focuses on land-based ecosystems. I think some of the key things here that we wanted to emphasize is that we're looking at landscape scale processes, that we want to focus not only on terrestrial ecosystems, which some people consider to be upland ecosystems, but also given the areas of Alaska and northern regions that are dominated by water on the landscape, we also wanted to recognize the fact that understanding freshwater ecosystems is really important too as well. So even though our primary focus is on terrestrial ecosystems, we want to bring in freshwater ecosystems as much as possible, especially when you think about the land serving as habitat for critical wildlife species. Many of those are dependent upon freshwater systems as well. And then we also want to understand what the potential is for future change based upon the research that's ongoing. The challenge we faced, I think, too, was to create a coherent set of objectives and then performance elements. Andrew mentioned last time, or in the last talk, that the previous team focused on milestones, and each collaboration team milestones. Milestones in the new research plan have been replaced by what's called performance elements. So the performance elements that we identified are specific activities that we feel can be carried out over the next several years, as mentioned by Martin Jeffries in his introductory talk. And as the plan moves forward and some of the performance elements are achieved, then there will be room to add additional performance elements in the future based upon how the team develops and carries out its activities. So could you go to the next slide, please? So really, we focused on three objectives that had three specific focuses, if you will. And the first one was actually focused on improving our understanding and ability to model feedbacks and interactions of the processes causing climate change and the responses of terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems. So really what we're looking at is the feedbacks of terrestrial ecosystems to the climate system, and then basically how the ecosystems are responding to the drivers of change. And the performance elements that we developed for this specific objective really focused in four areas. The first one was actually on carrying out and synthesizing results from field-based research and monitoring to improve understanding of key processes and interactions. We felt that there was also a need to really focus on the major disturbance processes as well, the processes that are driving change. So our second performance element focuses on the disturbance processes themselves. As Randy mentioned, that includes fire, but also includes warming permafrost, insects and pathogens, as well as human activities. In order to move forward in terms of developing data sets that are used for monitoring and assessing changes at landscape scale. We recognize the importance of geospatial data products like large fire data sets or other data sets that are based upon synthesis of activities, as well as remotely sensed data. So we felt that having a performance element focused on the production and integration of these key geospatial data sets was important. And then the last performance element really focuses on using that's derived from the first three performance elements in improving and developing advanced models of the ecosystem processes and disturbances. So we view these as an integrated set of performance elements that can overall address that first objective. The next slide, please, Meredith. So the second one was actually then focusing on what are the impacts of those changes on key animal and plant population, their habitats that are used in subsistence activities by the societies and groups of people, in particular Native people who live. And so really, this one focuses on producing information that's important for understanding those changes. So we're really starting to focus here on the impacts of these changes through subsistence activities. The second performance element focuses on the data sets that are needed to understand changes to and the distribution of key aquatic and terrestrial animal populations and their movements. And then basically the third one focuses on understanding how changes are influencing northern residents, with a particular emphasis here of also integrating the perspectives of indigenous knowledge of stakeholders into these assessments. The third goal was developed specifically in mind to emphasize the important role of fire in terrestrial ecosystems in the IRPIC area. And so again, this has two performance elements that are designed to be cross-cutting in nature. So the first one continues the work that was started by the previous wildfire collaboration team in understanding how changing fire regimes are impacting northern communities, both on infrastructure, health, and subsistence opportunities. And then the second one actually then connects to some of the other collaborations teams in terms of understanding emissions from wildland fires affect atmospheric carbon budgets and climate feedbacks. So this provides an opportunity to focus on some of the unique aspects of fire activity in IRPIC. The next slide, please, Meredith. So I think one of the things that we've begun to think about in IRPIC is who are the, or in the Terrestrial Ecosystems Collaboration Team, who are the different participants in this collaboration team? Where do they come from? What are their interests? And I think one of the challenges we face is the fact that we have, when you start looking at the federal and state and other stakeholder communities, they all have specific areas of interest that they're involved in that when you add them up together provides not only represents their interest on the landscape of Alaska and IRPIC, but also what their likely contributions are to be. So when we start thinking about basically who owns the land where all these processes are occurring, it's actually a variety of federal agencies, state agencies, as well as native corporations own the land and manage the lands in Alaska. So they're obviously going to be participants. But then that sort of land ownership paradigm breaks down when you think about, well, who manages the fish and wildlife populations and sets regulations for those? And that's actually the state of Alaska. Regardless of who owns the land, they're setting the regulations about how those resources are used. So you have a different geographic matrix that crosses over the land management boundaries that we have to consider. And then when we look at our key native groups through their Alaska Native corporations, they have their own government structure that dictates how they view the land. So I think it's when we start looking at who's collecting the data, which which to a large extent are those agencies who are managing the lands, and then who uses the data, we have a very complex set of circumstances that we're going to have to deal with when we organize this team. And so the next slide, please, shows our first attempt here to identify potential participating agencies, organizations in this goal 7 and what are their potential roles. And the one thing I want to emphasize here is that when we start talking about the agencies who have interests in IRPIC, it's not only the federal agencies, but there are state agencies and native organizations as well. And so that's why our IRPIC is really encouraging participation from the broad group of researchers and stakeholders who have an interest in our goal and objective. But then when you start types of activities that these different organizations carry out, they're really sort of, and are going to contribute to this goal, there's really sort of a dichotomy in terms of some of the agencies are carrying out inventory and monitoring activities specific to their land management responsibility, so for a specific region. Some are actually funding ecological research within their agencies as well as from universities, researchers, for a specific region. But then there's other inventory and monitoring activities that are cross-agency or for the entire region, so they provide a more broader set of data. And then there are also a group of ecological research and assessments that are cross-agency in nature and occurring across the entire region. So we have a lot of potential participation in this collaboration team from a broad range of agencies, and I think that's the challenge we face, is how do we engage all these potential participants and how do we organize them? So that's something we're working on. One, please. So as we mentioned before, another thing that we face a challenge in designing this next set of activities for the IRPIC collaboration teams is that many of the research objectives are cross-cutting in nature, and Randy actually started talking about this when she said, how does the stuff that she and Eric worked on during the previous collaboration team, how does this contribute to the other IRPIC goals and objectives? And so this is sort of a different cut on the theme that Randy identified so if we just look at objective 7.1, we can see that that is actually connected to the environmental intelligence of 0.2 as well as the permafrost objective 6.3. And so one of the things I encourage everyone to do is to read over the current Arctic research plan so that you can develop a sense of how what we're doing for this collaboration team links to activities that are ongoing for the other collaboration teams. And just as a first cut at this, the next slide, please. I just sort of took a look at the group of terrestrial ecosystems performance elements and put them into different bins. And 4 bins I focused on were ecosystem processes and interactions, geospatial data sets, model improvements and applications, impacts on wildlife and society, and wildland fire. But you can sort of then say, if we were going to organize the performance elements in these different themes, you can see that basically the themes that we're working on in the terrestrial ecosystems collaboration teams actually contribute to the activities and objectives for other IRPIC teams. And so this is one of the challenges that we have moving forward, is making the connections between the different collaboration teams and develop a work plan so that basically people who want to contribute to multiple teams aren't wasting their time by doing the same thing for multiple teams. And I think with that, Steve Gray is going to now talk about a little bit about how he sees, or how we see ourselves moving, or actually no, just a second here. Sarah was going to actually give an overview talk on organization of IRPIC collaboration teams. Sarah, are you ready?
This is Meredith. Sarah had to step out to another meeting.
Oh, so you're going to do it?
I'm not prepared to do that.
Okay. So we'll move off then, and then Sarah can come in at a later meeting and give her pitch on how all the organization of IRPIC teams are put together. Steve, do you want to give your presentation?
Sure. I think I can run through this pretty quick. Meredith, if you can get us to a slide that you should have that has TECT implementation as the header on that. Just briefly how we're going to go about this, or the first few steps in the process. First things start with this March workshop that's really a kickoff for implementation of the new plan, and coming out of that, we, as well as the other teams, want to have at least a first draft of an annual work plan. A major component of this workshop is going to be in identifying and kind of solidifying some of the cross-cutting themes and making connections or strengthening connections with other collaboration teams, as well as looking at the possibility of work groups at both levels within an individual team, such as terrestrial ecosystems, but also very broad teams that encompass all of the implementation groups. And again, just finally, that the idea here is that we want to make this something more than just using existing efforts or initiatives to check the boxes on Milestones. Be interested in getting something much more out of it. Then the next slide, just briefly to recap some of the things that have been said about the strategy for recruiting people into TECT. We recognize, Rick has said this before, that in terms of the research component of the membership. We know that we have to have a very broad agency representation. We also have to have represent the state and tribal groups, things of that nature. But we also want to make sure that it's more than that, that we provide people in the university community, the international community, or in complementary disciplines such as perhaps social science or maybe even engineering to be able to participate in this group. We also want to make an effort, or we're going to make an effort, to ensure that when we're doing things like this or workshops that might come in the future, that we're bringing in people who control the purse strings or make decisions about funding research in the Arctic so that they can hear from us on the needs of the community or where those gaps might be, at the same time that we can use that as an additional opportunity to educate those people in terms of the needs of stakeholders. Also going to make a concerted effort to make sure that we welcome early career scientists and people that are doing really innovative work out there in the Arctic, and again make this a platform or an opportunity for community and stakeholder engagement. I'd also say that one thing that I'm in particular, or interested in particular, is bringing in folks that have expertise on communication and community engagement to these events or participation in work groups so that they can help us, again, understand the needs of the people who would use this information, but also to help us push the messages out to the folks that would need it. So I think I can stop there and then just turn it back over to Eric.
All right, so we've had people listening for about an hour and 20 minutes now. I'd like to open up the floor and see if anybody has any questions or suggestions. Like to share your thoughts with us at this time?
So Eric, this is Randy. So you said there's a coming up in March, that's a workshop, and then there will be a team lead meeting in Anchorage in April. Is that right?
No, Randy, we're having our team lead meeting in Anchorage in March. And at that time, I think Jeremy, Steve, and I will prepare our first annual plan for the Terrestrial Ecosystems Collaboration Team, which then I think we'll probably distribute and discuss amongst the team at our meeting in April. So that, I think,
okay, that makes more sense.
Plan for moving
thanks for clarifying that.
The next couple months. But I guess one of the challenges we face here is are there ongoing activities that we can look towards to help foster the collaborations that we're seeking to foster here? So for an example, Randy, the meeting that's being organized on fire data products or fire remote sensing and managers could actually be considered to be an important
contribution absolutely.
To this team,
and not only that, I was also thinking of we have just initiated an idea to maybe have a webinar in April on smoke impacts and what that's likely to mean, and it will involve folks from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium as well as some science on wildfires and smoke. And that would be a great thing to have a co-sponsored webinar with IRPIC, I think, with the TECT.
Hi,
Okay.
this is, all right.
Go ahead, please.
Yep, thank you. So this is Anna Liljedahl here with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So a question, because I'm new to this organization, and thank you for your presentations. With the political climate that we have today and the budget situations, I'm thinking not both for Alaska as a state, but also at the national level. How does this organization see its role in conveying to the people the importance of Arctic science and Arctic research? And because I think there seems to be an excellent opportunity here considering this multi-institutional collaboration.
Well, this is Steve. If I can start out there, I think there are two main components to that. One is that IRPIC and TECT in particular gives us a chance to demonstrate how the science that we are doing is connected to actual on-the-ground needs, that we're responding to the needs of the state of Alaska, we're responding to the needs of communities, we're responding to the needs of Native groups. We're doing this for a reason. I think that's the first point. And then the second, there has been in recent years something that's been mentioned before, kind of this growing, you hear rumblings over and over again in Congress about lots of people running around in the Arctic doing stuff and potentially repeating data collections or using money in perhaps not the most efficient way. I disagree with that for the most part, but IRPIC and TECT give us the opportunity to, again, demonstrate that that is not, in fact, the case, that we are collaborating, that we are leveraging, and I think that that can be extremely powerful in demonstrating that we are using taxpayer dollars very effectively and that we are trying to squeeze every benefit possible out of every dollar that's provided for research. So I'll stop there with that, but I think that this is very important for addressing just the issue that you bring up on us.
Yeah, Steve, I'll add on to that a little bit. So one of the outcomes that IRPIC produces, it produces an annual report on the progress that we made, so we can actually highlight the very things that Steve was talking about, the things that we're doing, how we're coordinating things. And since IRPIC is actually created through a law passed by Congress, our annual report goes to Congress to report on what we did to implement the law that we were mandated to do. And then a copy of that report also goes to what's called the IRPIC principles, which is senior level from the executive branch, senior level representatives from every agency that form IRPIC. And so this is a report to those agency heads about here's the things that we've been doing to meet the mandate that IRPIC has in terms of coordinating federally sponsored research with research being carried out with other organizations.
It's Vladimir.
But Anna, that's a very good, that's a good
Vladimir,
question.
I wanted to add.
So Anna, I have, go ahead.
That's what Steve
Vladimir?
just said. It's very important. And from my kind of experience for the last, working in this area for the last, well, I don't know, 25 years maybe, there is huge progress in this. I remember like 20 years ago, it was there are lots of activities which were not even people didn't know about. One sponsored by different agencies. People didn't know about other people doing something. It was this kind of criticism was based on reality, I would say. So and there is huge progress right now. So it's much more information exchange. I think IRPIC is actually playing this very important role, but I think there is still way to go. And I think also not just trying to coordinate existing projects, but also maybe the goal should be to look at where is some missing parts as well, and through these exchanges and all these activities, what is going on, to develop some sort of recommendations. Where is the gaps, and what other projects needs to be, in what direction needs to be funded to close these gaps? Because pretty much you can only do this work on the basis of funded projects. Otherwise, it's kind of, well, it's not realistic to expect that people will do something without funding. So coordinating existing projects is one thing, and it's very important, but also developing some recommendations, what directions and what area need to, additional funding, something like this. Thank you.
Well, I think, Vladimir, you hit on an important point there, but this isn't something that was discussed earlier. The same act, IRPIC, also created the Arctic Research Commission, and it's the Arctic Research Commission that sets goals and priorities for Arctic research in the U.S., including the missing gaps. So in essence, and then we're supposed to be developing a research plan to carry out and coordinate the research that is being funded by the federal agencies to meet those gaps. So we have to be a little careful here to keep in mind what the role of the IRPIC is and what the Arctic Research Plan is. It doesn't mean that we can't provide some feedback to the Arctic Research Commission, but to be honest with you, our goal here is not to be identifying
I think still,
research gaps.
If you look
That's
at
not our mandate in IRPIC.
I think IRPIC may have much more, how to say, well, power and ideas about where to go. I mean, definitely you cannot go directly, but at least you have to, find good interaction with this commission to really, help them to do their job better.
Yeah, it just seemed, and thank you for your replies. I mean, the university here in Fairbanks are really struggling, and I think people are at the different research centers are trying to get their head together, so figuring out a tactic of how can we make people, legislators, governor, board of regents, and so on, understand why research is important to the people. And I think the same goes for at the national level, and just having all these applied examples of how all this effort actually helps regular
and just
person in the end.
Quick remark.
Yeah,
actually,
thank you. I was just curious to see what
my suggestion was
had.
not going on
No,
a very
that's
high
a good
level,
point.
but even on the level of agencies, you definitely can implement something, a priority, right? So not asking for new projects, big projects, and so and so, but just every time submitted, the agencies needs to figure out which one will be funded. So you can actually implement this gap filling activities on the level of agencies, not necessarily going to the Arctic Science Commission.
So Anna, I actually have a question for you. Because I just became aware of something called the Arctic Synthesis Workshop that you're evidently involved with, at least
Right.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that might feed into this effort that we're carrying out here?
Yeah, so it's funded by Neil's program, the Arctic System Science Program, and Charles Versmardy.
Funded by whom?
Neil Swanberg and his program Arctic System Science at NSF.
Okay, good, because I'm not sure everybody understands who Neil Swanberg is, so I just wanted to get that background in there.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's a smaller grant that Charles Versmardy is the PI of, and it's aimed, it's to support 2 workshops, one that just were back in December, and then that's one that's coming up that's focusing on currency, energy, carbon, water, and it's specifically like how can we work together to improve our understanding of the Arctic as a system, and it's using yeah, there'll be a mix of people with different backgrounds, and I think this second meeting is going to be an open meeting, and I'm not sure if what they distributed, but the schedule right now is in April, and it will end up being a report, one report focusing on extreme events as a theme to tie different disciplines together, and the other one using currencies. And that report then will go back to Neil, that hopefully he can use to make sure his program can remain intact and continue in the future.
So this is to identify ongoing activities or needed areas of research, or both?
It's a good question. I think my take on it seems like it's to give Neil some ammunition for showing how the approach of thinking about the Arctic as a system can push or elevate individual disciplines forward as well as disciplines together, and it's, I think it will give examples of where we can reach further ahead with our understanding if we work together in different disciplines, further if we just work in one discipline individually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because some of us might be invited to that, so I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Get a little more background on what exactly it is they're trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think this next meeting is an open meeting. It's Charles Versmardy who's in charge of all the invitation and stuff. So I'm not sure how they handle.
Okay.
Hi, Anna. This is Meredith at IRPIC. If you want to post about that on the website, that would be very helpful.
Oh, cool. Good idea.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or suggestions?
This is Alyssa Rodriguez in Anchorage, and I have kind of a broad question, and that is, so when I see goals, when I see milestones that I think, oh, I think my research applies to this, and I'd like to work with folks and kind of trying to collaborate and accomplish these things, should I just go to those milestones on the IRPIC website and comment and say, you know, hey, I'm interested in working towards accomplishing this milestone. Is there anybody else? Or kind of what is the best way to go about trying to find other people on this team to work with and try to tackle milestones with?
Okay, so I'll give you my suggestion. First of all, when people identify them, could you let us know who you are with, what organization you're with, just so that we know, you know, what your interests are? as a beginning point, Alyssa, it might be helpful for Jeremy, myself, and Steve if you sent us an email just outlining what your research activities are and how you feel it might contribute to IRPIC, because that will help us then identify who to go to when we start developing a plan to put together who can contribute to this and who is interested in participating. Does that make sense, Steve and Jeremy?
Yeah, I think it does. And then in the future, as we build on this and develop, for example, subgroups or standing work groups, things of that nature, we'll have an opportunity to plug people in as appropriate there. And I think that those activities would be a natural springboard for just the kind of collaborations that you're talking about, or at least that is very much what we're hoping to accomplish through that mechanism.
And so I would encourage anyone who's on this phone to share their thoughts as to how they feel they could contribute to do so, because that's going to help us develop our plan for moving forward.
Thanks. That sounds great to me. And I'm with UAF. I'm also with the Alaska State Department of Labor and Workforce Development. But for this, I'm predominantly with UAF, and I focus on connecting subsistence and firefighting. So how will changes in the firefighting regime impact how people can participate in subsistence and that sort of thing?
Oh, okay, great. Anyone else? Okay, so I wanted to thank everyone for their participation, and we look forward to interacting in the future. And if you should have any questions or comments or suggestions, please feel free to share it with us. Because we really want, this is supposed to be about a community and not just three of us getting up and telling you what our ideas are every week. So, but I know it's difficult at the beginning until we get organized for those types of conversations to occur. Steve and Jeremy, do you want to say anything to close the meeting?
I just say thanks to everybody for participating and sticking through this. I'm pretty excited about getting things off the ground, so I'll leave it there. Thanks, Eric.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.